Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the Wild Bunch were on top of the world after the infamous Wilcox Train Robbery, but their days were numbered. In this video, we're unraveling the downfall of the Wild Bunch. How did some of the most infamous outlaws in the Wild West meet their end? And the biggest question of all, did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid really die in a shootout in Bolivia, or did they somehow manage to escape once again? If you want to know how the Wild Bunch rose to infamy and pulled off the West's greatest train robberies, you can check out that video after this one. I will link it at the end. If you enjoy this journey into Wild West history, liking the video and subscribing helps me out a lot. Chapter 1. The Aftermath of the Wilcox Train Robbery. It was June 2, 1899, in the remote wilderness of Wyoming, when Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the Wild Bunch pulled off one of the most daring heists in American history, the Wilcox Train Robbery. They made off with a fortune, $50,000 in gold and cash. But little did they know, this heist would spark a manhunt that stretched across borders. Immediately after the robbery, the Pinkerton Detective Agency ramped up efforts to capture the Wild Bunch. The lawmen pursued them across the vast, rugged lands of Wyoming. The outlaws retreated to their well-known hideout, Hole in the Wall, a remote and heavily protected hideaway in Wyoming's Bighorn Mountains. But this time, Butch Cassidy knew their luck was running out. In July 1899, just weeks after the robbery, Cassidy made the strategic decision to split up the gang. They dispersed across the American West to avoid capture. Some, like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, briefly returned to Hole in the Wall, but they knew they couldn't stay for long. Others, like Harvey "Kid" Curry Logan and Ben Kilpatrick, set off on their own. The once united gang was now fractured, scattered across the vast plains of Wyoming, Colorado, and Texas. The decision to split up may have bought them time, but it marked the beginning of the end for the Wild Bunch. Chapter 2. The Capture and Death of Key Members of the Wild Bunch. As the Wild Bunch fragmented, the law began closing in on individual members. William News Carver, one of the gang's most notorious members, fled to Texas in hopes of escaping the Pinkertons, but his notoriety followed him. In April 1901, Carver was ambushed by the Texas Rangers in Sonora, Texas, after being tipped off by a local informant. During a gunfight, Carver was fatally wounded. His death marked the beginning of the Wild Bunch's collapse. Next came Ben Kilpatrick, known as the Tall Texan. He continued his criminal ways after the gang split. Kilpatrick ventured into Missouri, engaging in train robberies. But in March 1901, during a failed robbery in St. Louis, Kilpatrick was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His capture sent shockwaves through what remained of the Wild Bunch. But one man was perhaps the most ruthless of them all, Harvey "Kid" Curry Logan. Known for his violent temper and unmatched gun skills, Kid Curry was feared even among his fellow outlaws. After the gang split, Logan continued his life of crime with a reckless abandon. He was involved in multiple shootouts, often leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Unlike Butch Cassidy, who preferred to outsmart his enemies, Kid Curry was known for shooting first. In July 1901, after killing a sheriff in Knoxville, Tennessee, Logan was pursued relentlessly by the authorities. He fled to Montana, but couldn't shake the law for long. In 1902, after robbing a train near Parachute, Colorado, Logan found himself in another deadly gunfight with lawmen. Although he managed to escape this time, his days of evading capture were coming to an end. The Pinkertons, who had long considered him one of the Wild Bunch's most dangerous members, finally closed in on him in 1903. After a botched attempt to rob a bank in Colorado, Logan was injured and surrounded by lawmen. Rather than face a trial and certain execution, Kid Curry took his own life, ending one of the bloodiest careers in the Wild West. Logan's death marked a turning point in the downfall of the Wild Bunch. His violent reputation had been a cornerstone of the gang's fearsome image, and with his passing, it became clear that the law was winning the battle against the once untouchable outlaws. Chapter 3: The Final Years of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. With their gang falling apart, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid knew it was time to leave the United States. In February 1901, under the aliases James Ryan and Harry Place, they boarded a ship in New York bound for Buenos Aires, Argentina. Alongside them was Etta Place, Sundance's romantic partner. They hoped that the distance and anonymity of South America would give them a fresh start. Upon arriving in Buenos Aires, they laid low for a while. But by 1902, they moved to a remote region of Patagonia, buying a 12,000-acre ranch in the Cholula Valley, a secluded area in southern Argentina. For several years, from 1902 to 1905, Butch and Sundance lived as ranchers, seemingly leaving their outlaw ways behind. But in February 1905, their names surfaced once again in connection with a robbery in Rio Gallegos, a town in southern Argentina. The Pinkertons, who had never stopped searching for the duo, were alerted to their location. Realizing that they had to flee, Butch, Sundance, and Etta abandoned their ranch and crossed the Andes into Chile. From Chile, they made their way to Bolivia, arriving in the rugged, lawless highlands of the country. It was here, in 1908, that their final chapter unfolded. After a payroll robbery in San Vicente, Bolivia, Butch and Sundance were tracked down by Bolivian soldiers. Trapped in a small house on the outskirts of the town, they engaged in a fierce gunfight. According to official accounts, Sundance was wounded, and Butch, unwilling to see his friend suffer, shot him before turning the gun on himself. But there's a twist. No one can say for certain if those bodies were really Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The graves were unmarked, and their identities were never conclusively confirmed. Did they really die in Bolivia, or did they escape one last time? To this day, their fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Wild West. Some say Butch returned to the United States under an assumed identity, while others believe Sundance slipped away into the wilderness of South America. Chapter 4: The Legacy of the Wild Bunch. Though the Wild Bunch's days of robbing trains and banks are long gone, their legend continues to captivate. Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and their gang have become mythologized as symbols of the Wild West, charming outlaws who defied the law, living by their own code. Part of their lasting appeal lies in the ambiguity of their deaths. The mystery surrounding Butch and Sundance's fate only adds to their myth, leaving room for speculation and imagination. Did they die in a hail of gunfire in Bolivia? Or did they escape, disappearing into the shadows of history? The lack of definitive answers has allowed their story to live on, immortalized in books, films, and popular culture. The 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford, brought their story to a new generation, transforming them from outlaws into cultural icons. In the film, Butch and Sundance are portrayed as anti-heroes, charming, witty, and rebellious, capturing the public's imagination with their bold escapades and unbreakable bond of friendship. But beyond the romanticized versions of their lives, the Wild Bunch represented something deeper, the end of an era. As railroads and law enforcement spread across the West, the once lawless frontier was being tamed. The Wild Bunch were among the last outlaws who operated in a world where they could vanish into the wilderness after a robbery. With their demise, the Wild West itself began to fade, replaced by the modern world of cities, telegraphs, and a growing sense of order. The story of the Wild Bunch reminds us of a time when the rules weren't yet set in stone, when the frontier was still wild, and when the legend of the outlaw was still being written. Their legacy lives on, not just as criminals, but as enduring symbols of freedom, rebellion, and the irresistible lure of the open road. But how did Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the Wild Bunch become so notorious? Check out this video to find out. If you enjoyed this dive into one of the most notorious outlaw gangs in American history, let me know in the comments below. Liking the video and subscribing helps me out a lot. While we've touched on the fates of the Wild Bunch, there are countless more stories to explore, like Harvey Logan's wild adventures, which could fill a whole video by itself. If you're curious, drop a comment and let me know who you'd like to hear about next. More videos are already in the works, so I'll see you in the next one.